Okay, so last time we talked about um, macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. This time we're going to talk about micronutrients, which includes vitamins and minerals and some other stuff. And wanted to talk about a couple more uh, herbs that are native to the woods around here, woodland root herbs. Before we talked about blue cohosh and bloodroot. Today I want to talk about ginseng and black cohosh. Hello. So black cohosh is not real closely related to blue cohosh. They're in the same family, but it's a plant family that contains lots and lots of different plants. And they're not in the same genus, so they're not super closely related. They're distantly related, and not necessarily more closely related to each other than they are to a lot of other plants, in spite of the similarity of their common names and some similarity of their uses, which is actually probably where their common names come from. But black cohosh is sort of black looking when it first starts growing. The stems of it can keep a black color to them. The leaves, of course, are green, but it's a very dark, really, it's a very dark purple color when it's first sprouting, when it's first, not sprouting, but when it's first putting up a shoot in the springtime. The root is the main part that is used medicinally. And the main use that black cohosh gets put to in sort of the herb industry or in a lot of modern herbal medicine is for the relief of menopausal symptoms like hot flashes. There have been a bunch of different clinical trials and studies involving the use of black cohosh for menopausal symptoms. In Europe, it's very widely used. It doesn't grow there, and it's not part of their traditional medicine, but it has become and has been for a long time a very standard treatment for menopause in some communities in Europe, and it's pretty widely used here too. It's usually one of the top selling herbal medicines, and I don't know statistics on exact quantities, but much of it, perhaps most of it, is not cultivated. It's harvested from the wild by root diggers. It is somewhat environmentally sensitive too. You tend to see more of it in the woods around here than you do of the blue cohosh. In spite of the fact that it is harvested more, and it can be very locally abundant. You can sometimes find a cove or a creekside area in the woods that is just full of this stuff. And you can look at that and think, how can this be, ecologically sensitive when there's so much of it here? But the fact of the matter is that it's not in so many places. It's in, sometimes you find a lot of it growing together, but there are lots of places where you don't find it because it only grows in the woods and it only grows in certain woods and so forth. So it's limited by its habitat. A lot of the habitat that it would grow on, if it were able to, has been allocated for other things by people. So it's been logged, or it's been turned into farmland or turned into farmland or housing, or, a Walmart or a Dollar General store or something like that. Lots of different land uses for things that used to be woods. So that has the habitat loss has a big impact on how much of it there is available. And then, of course, it can sometimes be exploited, harvested unsustainably for its medicinal uses, or for people who want to sell it to manufacturers of medicinal products. So, as far as its uses go, black cohosh, well, a word about preparation first. The stuff that's in black cohosh that makes it do what it doesn't dissolve well in water. It's poorly soluble in hot water, so it dissolves better in alcohol. and in higher concentrations of alcohol. And traditionally, it was also made into a remedy using animal fat as the solvent, as the extracting medium. So it can be made into an oil or a fat-soluble remedy as well. Some of the commercial products that are out there are just ground up black cohosh root stuffed into capsules, which is probably not that easy for your body to digest. It's a hard, woody root, and our bodies just aren't that great at, our digestive systems aren't that great at dissolving or breaking up material that's that hard. Some of them are actually a dried powdered extract, where they make an extract in alcohol and then evaporate the alcohol off, leaving behind some brown stuff, and they put that in the pills. And that's what some of the more concentrated ones are made out of, and that's what a lot of the studies that have been conducted have actually used, is a proprietary product that is made using isopropyl alcohol as a solvent, dissolving it in the isopropyl alcohol, and then extracting the alcohol, which is not fit for human consumption, away, leaving behind a powder, and then making that into tablets, which I don't really love that myself. I don't really like using something at any point in the process that's really not fit for human consumption, even though, you know, for the most part, it's getting evaporated away. It feels not quite right to me, so I don't do it that way. Although lots of people take that product and lots of people have positive results with it. One interesting study that I have seen with black cohosh looked at a bunch of other studies to see whether black cohosh helped the people in those studies with hot flashes and other menopausal symptoms. And they found that in the ones conducted in places where the black cohosh was heavily regulated as far as its manufacture goes, it had positive effects. And in the places where it wasn't, it had negative effect, or it didn't have positive effects, in spite of the fact that allegedly they were similar substances. So, you know, that suggests to me that probably the finer points of processing make a big difference in terms of how it turns out. That if you do a really good job processing it, maybe it's going to turn out to be an effective medicine. And if you do less of a good job, maybe it's not. So I don't exactly know what the difference really was between those different products, but it appeared that there was something from the types of tests results that were there. So people use it for hot flashes, people use it for night sweats, all sorts of things like that. And so some people kind of think or expect that it's going to contain estrogen, that it's going to contain progesterone, something like that. That would be like a hormone replacement therapy type of thing. But it doesn't. It doesn't contain anything resembling those substances. The alkaloids that it does contain are not, well, they're kind of their own thing, and they haven't been really well researched as far as how they work exactly in the human body. In my own empirical experience, what I have usually seen with it is that it does not work well in people that don't have a uterus anymore. So if somebody is going through these symptoms just as a regular result of age, then often it's pretty helpful. And if they're going through them as a result of having had, if they're going through an induced menopause as a result of having had their ovaries and uterus removed, then you usually don't have as much success with it. And I've even seen it, and this appears to be true to me. I haven't taken any kind of measurements or made any sort of statistical anything all that quantified from it, but it appears to me that even in people who still have their ovaries but don't have a uterus anymore and have reached a natural menopause, they are and are, you know, just not having as much estrogen in their system anymore. It doesn't seem to work as well. So I think that its action has to do with stimulating the uterus and getting the body to produce more estrogen, even though it's not necessarily got anything like estrogen in it. In addition to its uses for that, black cohosh has also been used as an anti-inflammatory, and it has been used topically for bites and stings. And even though I usually use plantain for that, which is very abundant, it's something that does have that tradition of use, including for snake bites, which, in the cases where I've gotten to have anything to do with cases of snake bite, the person wasn't with me when they got bit with a snake, so I'm not sure what that would be like. I'm not sure how well that works, just because I don't really get the chance to work with that sort of injury very often. So if you are harvesting black cohosh, make sure that you are familiar with the stand that it's growing in, and maybe observe it for a season or so before you do anything with it. And in any case, don't take more than 1 in 10 plants, and keep track of the size of the stand as time goes on, so that you know that you're not gradually depleting it at a faster rate than it can repopulate itself. A lot of the time we say, 1 plant in 10, but that's not set in stone or anything. That's a small enough amount that the stand can probably handle it, but maybe not. And you kind of have to not harvest from it if those plants aren't replaced by new plants. And just like other woodland root crops, you don't want to harvest it until the seeds have gotten ripe and the leaves have started to change. So that's when they're ready to harvest, is when the seeds can be scattered and potentially grow into new plants, and when the leaves are starting to die back and sending all their nutrients and other substances that are in them into the root for the winter. Let's see, is that true for all roots? It's true for all perennial roots. If you try and do it with annual or biennial roots, you kind of have to harvest them before they go to seed, or else the root will they're not going to store stuff in the root over the winter. They're just going to die off and come back from seed. So it's only true of perennials, which most of these woodland root plants are, including black cohosh, and including the one that I'm about to talk about, which is ginseng. So ginseng is it's kind of probably one of the most storied plants in Appalachian herb lore. It's very similar to Chinese ginseng, and they're both in the genus Panax, in the family Araliaceae, which is the Aurelia family, which also contains ivy and devil's club and some other plants that aren't as well known. They all have like an umbrella-shaped cluster of flowers, umbrella-shaped to spherical cluster of flowers, and divided leaves. And many of them have medicinal roots and or barks if they're more tree-like. So ginseng was and is a plant that's part of traditional Chinese medicine. And in the early days of people from Eurasia coming and going from North America, some priests who were familiar with Chinese medicine noticed that ginseng, or something very like it, this plant that they knew from Chinese medicine, grew in the forests of North America. And so, they shared some samples with some other people, and pretty soon there was a demand for this ginseng that was growing wild here, because there's really not much wild ginseng in China at all. There's not a lot of wilderness left in the part of China that it originally grew in. And it was never a very common plant because it's very selective about its habitat. It takes years to grow and so forth. So it's cultivated a lot, but the wild stuff has always been more highly esteemed. And so wild ginseng from America started way back in maybe the 1700s or so. I'm not exactly sure when, being sold from Eastern North America to Eastern Asia. And that trade exists to this day. And that's where probably 80% of the wild ginseng that's harvested in the Eastern United States ends up getting used, is in Asia. So it's not exactly the same medicinally. It's often considered to be a cooler plant than the Asian ginseng, although how spicy a ginseng plant is varies a lot from one plant to the next, and how much resin is in the roots. So they're a little bit different, but generally, ginseng is considered to do a few different things that are not very disease oriented. So, a lot of the time people will say, what is ginseng for? Meaning, what disease do you use it for? And that doesn't really have a good answer, because it's not really understanding the nature of the tradition that ginseng comes from. Culturally, ginseng is used as a tonic, meaning that it promotes overall well-being, that it makes subtle changes to the body that promote overall well-being and good function, especially increased stamina, increased appetite, and decreased inflammation. So a lot of the time, ginseng has been used by older people to make them feel the way they felt when they were younger. So that's kind of one way that people think about it. And sometimes people will talk about it being anti-aging. That's sort of a buzzword in the modern wellness industry. And I kind of hate that terminology. I think that if anything, it's pro-aging, because it helps to make it more likely that you get older and feel like getting older instead of just stopping, because those are the choices. But ginseng does make people feel more energetic. It does make some of the aches and pains go away that tend to settle into our joints and bones as we get older. And it does make it easier for people to get into shape physically, to put on muscle mass, to burn fat, to have the energy to be able to exercise, and that sort of thing. So that's one area in which I would use ginseng, is if somebody is trying to have more energy, have more stamina, and work on their health, it can really help with that process. In a very simple way, it's also a good thing for digestion. If somebody is always having indigestion or can't handle the foods that they used to be able to eat, if they're not having any appetite, especially, ginseng can be really helpful for that. It can make people have a more hearty appetite, and it can make people process the energy that they get from food in just a little bit of a different way, so that instead of feeling exhausted after they eat, they feel like they've fueled up and are ready to go and do something with all this energy that they've consumed. It's a question of, can it cause heart palpitations in someone who's prone to them? Yes. And that's the other thing about ginseng, is that it is stimulating and it is warming, And if somebody has a hot constitution, or even more metaphorically speaking, a hot temper, ginseng can exacerbate that. If somebody has heart issues, it can make them show up. If somebody is kind of like bipolar, it can sometimes trigger mania if the dose is large enough. It can sometimes make people feel sleepless. It can increase feelings of sex drive, which is a positive thing for some people, and other people don't want it. And let's see, what else does it do? It can raise blood pressure in some people. Some people it lowers their blood pressure, but in some people it can actually raise it. It does tend to stabilize blood sugar. So that is an important use for ginseng in the clinic, is if somebody is tending to have blood sugar that's really high when they wake up in the morning, sometimes ginseng will help to keep it from doing that. If it's fluctuating a lot during the day, sometimes ginseng will help it to be more stable. So it's is a useful herb, and that is kind of just part of its overall profile of changing how the body handles energy. In modern herbal medicine, we would sometimes describe it as an adaptogen, meaning that it helps the body adapt to stress and change. And while it certainly does do that, that's not all it does. And some people kind of think of it as just like an energy boost, which it can be that, but it's not the same kind of thing as caffeine, where it's just waking you up and making you feel more stimulated. It's really changing how your body is converting food into energy, and it's changing sort of the messaging in your body by changing your metabolism a little bit, and how different parts of your body communicate with each other. So when you look at the active constituents in ginseng, there are a lot of steroids in it. Steroids are molecules that have a 17-carbon nucleus arranged in a few rings, and some extra stuff added onto that. And in the case of ginseng, some of that extra stuff are sort of starch or sugar groups, a section of a molecule which, if it was off by itself, would be a sugar or a starch. And what these steroid and sugar units, one thing that they do physically with the properties of ginseng is that they make it so that it's kind of sudsy. If you have a good strong ginseng extract and you shake it once or twice, you'll get a big thick head of foam on top of it. If you get something with ginseng in it, or something that's supposed to have ginseng in it, and it doesn't make suds when you shake it, it doesn't have much ginseng in it, or it doesn't have very good ginseng in it. So these substances are kind of they're called saponicides because they act like soap when they're in water. They form these bubbles and things, and they're structured kind of like soaps. But it would be a waste to wash your clothing with them. But they have that sort of physical property, and they're also can be correctly thought of as being a type of steroid that's making people feel stronger and more energetic. You don't tend to see a lot of immune suppression with them the way that you would with some other steroidal things. But you do see some reduction in inflammation, although that's not super powerful. It's mild to moderate strength, and you do see a lot of changes in how energetic people feel. Ginseng is quite ecologically sensitive. Part of the reason that ginseng is so susceptible to overharvesting is that it takes maybe 6 years, maybe longer than that, for a plant to go from seed to being a mature plant, or to go from sprout to being a mature plant. It can take about 2 years for it to go from being a seed to being a sprout. So germination of the seeds can take 2 seasons. 1 or 2 seasons, and then growing to a mature plant takes a few more, maybe 6 more, maybe 8 more. And if you harvest it any sooner than that, you're just wasting it. It's not going to be a mature plant, and it's not going to have mature plant substances in it. It's also, I think, pretty dependent on the type of soil it grows in or the type of growing conditions that it has as to what sort of strength it ends up having. I have tasted cultivated ginseng that was not grown in the forest, but was grown in fields under shade cloths to kind of imitate the light levels of the forest. And it's just not the thing. It's just not, it doesn't contain the stuff that makes ginseng ginseng. It doesn't taste like it should. And it's not a subtle difference. It's a big, very obvious difference. So when I harvest ginseng, I have 3 places that I gather it from. 2 of those are where I've gathered almost all of the ginseng that I've used. And there's another one that's sort of like backup. The one that I've been harvesting from the longest, I first harvested from when I was about 3 years old with my family. And most recently harvested from, I guess, in 2019. And 2019 or 2020, I can't remember which. So I don't go through a ton of ginseng in my practice. Even though it's a well-recognized name, and it's, something that sells well, I really just try to harvest a little bit of it and use it as infrequently as I can, because there are a lot of other things that do some of the same stuff and that are easier to come by. Also, ginseng is not necessarily a good herb for people to take all the time. Sometimes I'll have people take it for 3 months and then come off of it and see how they feel, see if they feel a big difference. And sometimes they'll feel fine until winter or something like that, and then we'll do another couple months of it. But it's not something people need to be on all the time. It's something that's meant to shift how your metabolism and your endocrine system are functioning, and then kind of leave it that way rather than continuously taking the ginseng. So it's good to take breaks from it. If you don't, it sometimes maybe loses its effect, and you just kind of gradually return to what your baseline is, except now you're also spending money on ginseng. If you kind of use it intermittently, it kind of has that uplifting effect when you start using it each time. So yeah, it does not grow from its the root is a taproot rather than a rhizome. It doesn't send up new plants from the root. You can't cut the root in half and plant part of it back in the ground. You just have to take the whole plant and not take too many of them. And like what I said before, you gather it when the seeds are ripe. And with ginseng, the tradition is that you put your finger this far into the ground, about a halfway between these 2 joints of your small finger, and then that's how deep you plant the berries. Some people also cut the seeds or scratch the outside of the seeds with a pocket knife. I don't do that. I'm not sure that it makes much difference, but you plant them. Each berry contains a couple of seeds. They get eaten by birds and distributed throughout the forest. So if you find the right habitat for ginseng, you'll often find the ginseng if there's other ginseng nearby. But if it gets eradicated, there's no more seeds for it to come back from. So, it doesn't survive, for example, the forest being clear cut or even thinned very well, because it likes full shade. And areas that have been strip mined, it probably will never come back because it needs a certain soil type. It grows in mostly sandy soil, well-drained soil, on north-facing, more often than not, slopes of hills, under full shade from hardwood trees. So it's pretty picky about where it grows. And just like I said, with the other plant, habitat loss is a major issue for that. Although because it does grow on slopes, those don't tend to be the areas that people try to farm as much, or build on necessarily either. But it does grow among valuable timber. So a lot of the time, an area where ginseng lives will get logged, and then it just, it'll be decades, maybe even 100 years before that's the right type of woods again where ginseng would grow. So, it's quite susceptible to that sort of thing. It's pretty valuable. It's valuable enough that people poach it, that people go out in the woods and over harvest it because of economic desperation. Some people will plant large quantities of ginseng in the hope of cashing in on it themselves, like as a retirement type of plan or something like that. And so then those same people are often worried about it getting poached and, might guard it and that sort of thing, or have cameras on it. Yeah, it's ginseng is, when you see it growing in the woods, it's kind of surprisingly nondescript. It has a way of making itself inconspicuous, I guess is the best thing I can say. Each leaf consists of 5 leaflets, and there's usually 3 of them on a ginseng plant, but sometimes there's more than that. And they have a sort of interesting iridescence to them in when the angle of the light is low. So sometimes people will go out in the evening to look for it, and this would be no help if you weren't already used to how it looked, but you can recognize it once you see it. Their leaves have a different kind of shininess to them that sometimes makes them more recognizable when the light's coming in from a low angle, the way it does in the evening. And so you can, sometimes people will go out looking for that particular distinctive iridescence of the leaf that you might be able to see from further away as it's getting dark. Of course, it's important not to, get lost out in the woods or fall off a cliff or anything like that if you're going to try that. But once you start recognizing it, and I've had this experience multiple times, where I was looking for ginseng and looking, and then I see a plant, and then I realize that I'm in the middle of a big patch that I've been in for a while, and that I've been walking past them without seeing them, even though I was looking for them. And so that's something that it does. It's an experience that a lot of people have had with ginseng, and the more familiar you get with it, the more easy it is to recognize it. But it doesn't grow in central Kentucky on its own that I know of. I don't know of anywhere in central Kentucky that it grows of its own accord. In eastern Kentucky, it grows up in the parts of the hills where the bedrock is sandstone rather than limestone. So the mountains here have layers, and the sandstone layer is up on the ridges and a ways down from the ridges, and then below that there's kind of like a limestone layer, and it doesn't grow in those places. It grows further up. Often there are rhododendrons at that part of the hills, and mountain laurels, and a mix of hardwood and non-hardwood trees. Yeah, plants, they do really seem to hide from us sometimes. They have interesting behaviors or an interesting, I don't know what to call it exactly, but yeah, it does seem like that a lot of the time. And so, if you find ginseng, consider yourself lucky, consider yourself fortunate, and be very respectful of it. Treat it like a sacred plant. Treat them all like sacred plants, but treat ginseng especially like a plant that needs a lot of care. If you're going to interact with it at all, you need to do so very respectfully. It's very different from something like dandelion or clover that you can just harvest from and it's going to come back and that sort of thing. So use it sparingly and treat the living plant with a lot of respect and deference. And if you happen to have some that's on your property or anything like that, you want to be careful of people coming to poach it, or sometimes when people go out to harvest it, they'll wait till the seeds are ripe and then they'll cut down all the tops so that nobody else will come along after them and pick other plants from the same stand. That's a practice that a lot of ginseng diggers engage in, and it doesn't hurt the plants. They can continue, if the berries are not 100% of the way ripe, they can continue ripening, just like a tomato you get from the grocery store can continue ripening after you've brought it home. So that they've got the enzymes in them to do that and everything. So a lot of the time, that's what ginseng diggers will do, is just take their portion of the stand that they're going to take and then cut the rest of them down so that nobody sees them, nobody digs them up, that sort of thing. Because you don't want 5 different people coming to the same stand unaware of each other and each taking 1/10 of the plant, and then you've 1/10 of the plants, and then you've decimated the productivity of the stand by taking 1/3 of the plants altogether, or more than that, depending on how many people come along. So maybe half of them, maybe too many in any case. So, and of course, it's important to remember that humans aren't the only ones that have anything to do with ginseng. Animals eat it too, especially deer. They eat the tops. I don't know if any animals dig up the roots and eat those, but they might. Yeah, and sometimes leaving it be is the right thing to do. I take pretty little of it. I see hundreds and hundreds of people every year, and I usually use very very little ginseng, maybe a pound, maybe a couple pounds in the course of a year, because there are so many other plants. For example, devil's walking stick, Aurelia spinosa, is a very common plant in this environment. It's distantly related to ginseng, has a lot of the same properties, not all the same properties, but it does a lot of the same thing as far as stabilizing the body's energy and blood sugar and things like that. So if that's what I want, I'll use that instead of ginseng because I have it, and because it's common, and I don't have to worry about over harvesting, and I can harvest from the same plant 10 years in a row because I'm harvesting the bark from the above ground part instead of digging up the root and ending the plant's life. So that's something to keep in mind and something to be aware of.
What was the Latin name of that again?
Aurelia, Aralia, and species name is Spinosa, Spinosa, meaning spiny.
Thank you.
And that plant grows all along gravel roads in from like the eastern part of Clark County all the way into the mountains, and probably down to the other side of the mountains. So it grows through a wider geographic area than ginseng, which you don't really start seeing until you start getting up into the mountains themselves. So another thing to know about ginseng is that it can live a really long time. 100-year-old ginseng roots are out there. You can look at a ginseng root, and at the top of the root where the stem attaches, there are all these little wrinkles that are where previous year's leaves attached. And you can, by seeing how many layers of those there are, you can kind of tell the age of the plant. And there are some out there that are, 6 or 8 years old is really common, but some of them are decades old, and a few of them are even 100 years old or more. So it is, it's that kind of an organism that's sometimes grown in one place for generations and generations. So the topic for today is micronutrients. Last time we talked about macronutrients, which are things that you need a lot of. This time we're talking about micronutrients, which you need a very small amount of. Confusingly enough, they're not all measured in the same units. A lot of them are measured in milligrams. Some of them are measured in international units, which are just kind of like a little more specific to certain fat-soluble vitamins. I kind of think it's an annoying way of doing it because you could be measuring those in milligrams too, but people don't so much. So there are two categories of vitamins, which are fat-soluble and water-soluble. Then there's, besides vitamins, there's minerals, and then there's antioxidants, and some other stuff, lots of other kind of miscellaneous things that you need small amounts of. So the vitamins are things that are synthesized in living things. The minerals are, that's what the vita part means, is living. And then the minerals are geological. They come from the soil. They can neither really be created nor destroyed in the normal course of life on Earth. They just kind of change form. And that's things like iron and calcium and sodium and magnesium and so forth. A lot of them have that suffix at the end, but not all of them. So the fat-soluble vitamins are ones that are normally dissolved in fat. They're part of, or they're found in the fatty parts of food. This would be vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin E, and vitamin K. We'll start out with vitamin A. Vitamin A is retinol, and vitamin A, in the strictest sense of the definition, is an animal product. It's something that is synthesized in the bodies of animals, but it's also synthesized in the bodies of humans from carotenes, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So people get vitamin A from fish, from meat, eggs, other things that contain animal fat. And then they get the provitamin A, the stuff that your body turns into vitamin A, from vegetables. And beta carotene is the main source, or the most well-known of those. There are multiple other things that are similar, called carotenoids, but that can all essentially act as a form of vitamin A, as long as your metabolism is healthy, as long as your body is able to convert them. And so it doesn't really necessarily matter which you get, as long as everything else is working well. But the carotenoids are, for the most part, water soluble rather than oil soluble. So they are absorbed and metabolized differently. So vitamin A is necessary for vision. It's necessary for cell membranes, I mean, not cell membranes, but mucous membranes in the respiratory system. And children that don't get enough vitamin A get sometimes go blind, and also are more susceptible to disease. So the reason that measles kills a lot of people, even though most people in America who were, around when it was common got it and had little effect from it, one of the reasons is because if you don't have enough vitamin A, it's much more dangerous for you. And that's true of a lot of illnesses. A lot of, if you're malnourished as far as vitamin A goes, you won't have the resistance to some conditions that you would have if you had it. Vitamin E is also found in animal fat and can also be synthesized in the human body from fatty acids from plants. Vitamin E is sort of your body's natural preservative. It keeps you from decaying. It protects the cell membranes, the coverings of cells, helps to keep cells fresh, and basically protects them from mutating or from being invaded as easily by bacteria or broken down as easily by bacteria. But yeah, vitamin E is something that it helps the skin to be supple and helps keep the body healthy by keeping the individual cells healthy. Vitamin D is essentially a hormone. It does a lot of different things in the body. What people most strongly associate it with is keeping the skeleton healthy, keeping bones strong, helping calcium to get deposited into the bones. It's essentially acting as a signaling molecule in that capacity, telling the body to put the calcium into the bones rather than releasing it into the bloodstream. So people who don't get enough vitamin D get a condition called rickets, which involves poor quality formation of bones. So that's only with a gross deficiency of vitamin D, though. You have to be like really not only not have an optimum level of vitamin D, but have a very deficient level of it before you start to see rickets. Rickets started to be common again in the United States in the early 2000s because of people not going outside or only going outside while using a lot of sunscreen. The body synthesizes vitamin D. The skin produces vitamin D when it's exposed to sunlight. So it is something that we can photosynthesize. We can't photosynthesize calories the way that plants can, but sunlight does play a role in our metabolism. And vitamin D is one of the substances that it has an effect on. So most people can't get sufficient vitamin D just from sunlight unless they live in a tropical or subtropical area. In Florida, you probably can. In Kentucky, you probably cannot. Fortunately, vitamin deficiency is pretty hard to get into if you're eating anything like a normal diet and have a moderately functional digestive system. So you really don't see a lot of primary nutrient deficiency in people unless they're either starving themselves, usually as a result of an eating disorder, being starved by someone else, or not having a digestive system that works very well. And this isn't always true in places where there's, in situations where there is prolonged food scarcity. But it takes some doing to get into a vitamin deficient state. So with vitamin D, you can get it from animal fats. You can get it from sunlight. You can also, there are also vegetable sources of it. But one thing that we've learned about vitamin D more in the last couple decades is that it does have a lot of roles in how your metabolism functions and how your mental health is. And so I've been telling people with seasonal affective issues, with wintertime depression and that sort of thing, to take extra vitamin D. If you read older literature, it will often say, or stuff that's based on older literature, it will often talk about getting too much vitamin D. Theoretically, you can get too much of any of the fat soluble vitamins because your body can't just flush them out through your kidneys the way it can with the water soluble ones. Hypervitaminosis D tends to result in brittle nails and hair falling out and fragile skin. But most of the cases of that were from people taking large amounts of vitamin D2, which was a synthetic form of vitamin D that isn't very much used at all anymore. I can't remember the last time I saw vitamin D2 as an ingredient in somebody's vitamins. It's not, I think it used to be a cheaper form and now it's not even that. So nobody's really using it that much anymore. Vitamin D3 is kind of the most widely used, and it's a very usable form. And studies have been conducted giving people 25,000 IU of vitamin D for 6 months without seeing any sort of hypervitaminosis symptoms, without seeing any kind of side effects that they didn't see in a control group of similar people. So it's pretty safe to take in large doses. 25,000 IU, I'm not sure how many times the daily limit that is, but a lot. It's far, far beyond. It's maybe, I don't know, it's many times what you actually need in a day to keep you from getting rickets. But there are things like viral illnesses, for instance, which are seemingly a lot worse if you have less than an optimal amount of vitamin D. There was a lot of controversy about whether lack of vitamin D would make COVID worse, and whether using vitamin D would make it less bad. And it did seem that that both were eventually pretty well shown to be true. That not enough of it makes things worse, more of it makes things less likely to go badly. So it's a good idea to take it in the winter when the days are short and your body's not making as much of it from sunlight, and there's viruses going around, and there's more of a tendency for people to feel depressed too. So yeah, vitamin D3 is, generally speaking, a really safe thing to take and a good supplement for a lot of people. It's the only actual vitamin that I take on any kind of a regular basis. I try to get my nutrients from food. I think that's a really good way to get nutrition. But I have found that it is helpful, and I'm not so dogmatic about it that I would avoid doing something helpful just because it doesn't suit my particular sense of aesthetics or how things should work. So I take it every winter, and it since I've been doing that, it does seem to be helpful. I used to get really depressed in the winter, and now, I more get frustrated, but not nearly the sort of thing that it used to be. So that's A, E, D, and vitamin K. Vitamin K is in leafy green plants. It's very common, and it helps the blood clot. So it's something that if you don't have enough of, you're at more risk of blood loss from any sort of injury. And so it's a good thing to have enough of, but it's something that you very likely do get enough of as long as you're eating any kind of green vegetables as part of your regular diet. So it's a very common substance in food. And that's true for a lot of vitamins. That's true for a lot of vitamins. Most of the time, for instance, a lot of the time when we've seen deficiency of vitamins, it's because of people being in very unnatural situations, eating very unnatural diets. So, eat your greens, eat your kale and collard greens and whatever it is that you like in terms of that sort of thing. But, humans should eat leaves. And if they do, they usually get plenty of vitamin K.
Andrew, I have a funny story about vitamin D. It's short.
Yeah. Tell us.
I went to the doctor some years back and my vitamin D levels were 0. I kid you
Oh,
not.
God.
Non-existent in my body. And I don't eat crap either. My body was, for some reason, just not able to absorb vitamin D from the natural way of getting it. So
Mhm.
the doctor wanted to give me this pill that was like this redonkulous amount of vitamin D. And I wouldn't take it because I don't like to take pills. But I made a deal with him. I said, if I can't get it up on my own, I'll take your pill, but please give me time to try to do it myself. But I didn't realize how crappy I felt because of the lack of vitamin D until I actually took a supplement of 5,000 IUs from Now is what I take. And in like 3 or 4 months, I could tell such a huge difference in my joint pain and how I felt, my mood. Everything felt so much better. And you don't really realize you're even deficient in something like that until you
Right.
actually start taking it. And then you're like, oh, I feel great. But
Right.
it was crazy to me that I actually had 0 in my, it was like so low, it almost didn't show on the blood work. That's how bad
Yeah,
it was.
that's pretty alarming. That's
It is. I didn't have any symptoms except for severe joint pain. That was my symptom, which makes sense, I guess, but it was just insanity. So take your vitamin D.
yeah. So now I want to talk about the water soluble vitamins, and these are vitamins that are in the watery parts of plants. They're in juices, they're in fruits and vegetables, whereas the other stuff is more in seeds and animal products and things like that. These are in fruits and vegetables. They're in juices and also in grains. And because they're dissolved in water, they tend to be processed through the kidneys. And if there's more of them than you need, in most cases, your body will just flush them out. It doesn't store them for later. It just has a certain amount of them that are in circulation at any given time. So it takes less time to become deficient in them, but most of them are pretty ubiquitous too. First one I'll talk about is going a little bit out of alphabetical order is vitamin C. Vitamin C is a really famous thing, I guess. It's really well known, and it's something that a lot of people think of as being sort of the quintessential healthy substance. Possibly partly because it is one of the earliest ones that was really studied. A long time ago, people noticed that sailors who were on a very restricted diet, mostly just like salted meat and hard crackers or dry bread, tended to get certain symptoms, including sores on their skin and swollen joints, which are called scurvy. And that set of symptoms, known as scurvy, is something that people knew for a very long time that malnourished people would get. And mostly you saw it in sailors and prisoners because they lived on a very restricted diet. They didn't, have a lot of opportunities to just go out and get snack foods that they were craving or anything like that. So, they would sometimes develop these symptoms, and people didn't really know what it was from. They were, aware that it was a malnourishment thing that tended to go away when people started eating other stuff, but they didn't really know what. I'm not sure exactly how they kind of didn't quite make this connection, but they didn't really know what sorts of things, or it wasn't well known. I guess some people did know because there were some herbs out there with names like scurvy grass or whatever, that were just things that contained vitamin C. So people realized that they did help with scurvy, but it was much later before people started studying it a little more systematically. One of the people that gets credit for that was a sea captain named Captain Cook, who was kind of a mass murderer. He worked for the British government and was politically connected and things like that. So he got a lot of his ideas got more noticed than, say the village midwife or whatever would have. And he started giving sailors citrus juice because you could keep lime juice at room temperature. It won't really go bad. At least not very bad. It's already sour. And so they would give people lime juice, a ration of lime juice as part of their diet to keep them from getting scurvy. And eventually somebody figured out the exact substance that was in lime juice and various other things, which is called ascorbic acid. And ascorbic acid is part of the cycle or chain reaction of chemical reactions that the body uses to produce energy. And it's involved in keeping cells healthy. It's involved in preventing damage from free radicals and from oxidation. So it's a free radical scavenger and antioxidant that prevents sort of damage from the environment to cells. And it's also involved in how the body produces and distributes energy on a molecular level. So when there's not enough of it, various different sorts of inflammation and malfunction set in. And that was what people were observing as scurvy. And when people have the opportunity to either add some greens into their diet or, take something that is supplemental like a vitamin C pill or some lime juice, then the body has enough of it in circulation that that you don't get the problems that you would get without it. And like I said, it being a water soluble vitamin, it circulates and it gets flushed out. It doesn't really get stored in the body. So on the plus side to that, it's very hard to take too much of it in any meaningful amount, in any meaningful way. Too much vitamin C basically looks like your digestive system getting irritated because there's too much acid in the system and you get diarrhea, and that's about it. So it doesn't cause any kind of serious problems to have more than enough of it. The downside to that is you can't just take your month's vitamin C or a week's vitamin C all at once. It has to be something that's like an ongoing part of your diet that you're continually getting into your system, which for most people is not a problem. Most of us like to eat food and fruits and vegetables. Fruits and leaves almost invariably contain some vitamin C. A lot of them contain a lot of vitamin C. Orange juice has really made its content of vitamin C one of its selling points. The orange juice industry has done that, especially from the 70s or so up until now. And orange juice does contain lots of vitamin C, but so do lots of other things. So it's not necessarily like it's the definitive source for it or anything. They saw what milk was doing with calcium, and they were like, oh, we need something like that. They tried adding calcium to orange juice, but it made it too chalky, because it was chalk. That's what they were putting in it. But And you can still get that, but it's not very popular. But they kind of talked up the vitamin C component, even though most people who don't consume orange juice still get plenty of vitamin C, just like most people that don't consume milk get plenty of calcium. So, vitamins and minerals get used a lot as a marketing thing, talked up as a marketing point to make people feel like foods are functional. But really, what you need is not a specific food that contains a whole lot of some specific substance. What you really need is a balanced and varied diet, because you're a human being and we're meant to have that. So, and it's also a lot more fun to, eat a lot of different things, and taste a lot of different flavors and so forth. So, yeah, vitamin C is ascorbic acid, and there have been at different times people who were proponents of taking mega doses of vitamin C for various different reasons. Linus Pauling was a very notable example of that. He didn't really have a background in nutrition or anything like that, but he won 2 separate Nobel Prizes, one for physics and one for peace, I believe. So people regarded him as a really intelligent person. And his ideas around vitamin C were that people should take, hundreds of times the necessary dose, by which I mean the necessary dose to prevent scurvy. And that's how when you see the recommended daily allowance of vitamins or recommended daily intake of vitamins on nutritional labels, that's really what they're talking about, is what do you need to take in on a regular basis to keep from getting a deficiency state. And so that's not necessarily an optimum level, it's kind of a minimum. Anyway, he was taking hundreds of times that level, in the belief that it would preserve the cells better, that it would keep as much free radical damage from happening to the cells, and possibly, make people live longer. Whether he lived longer than he would have otherwise is kind of up for debate. It's not an easy thing to say what would have been. But in any case, it's not something that's really necessarily problematic. Some people don't tolerate vitamin C very well, and it upsets their stomach. Most people, if they get enough vitamin C, it will upset their stomach and maybe cause diarrhea, but that's about the worst that it does to anybody. So it's not something where you have to worry a lot about it. But it if you were spending a lot of money on it, you might be wasting it. I think that there are a lot of other antioxidants in food besides vitamin C that have a similar effect on free radical scavengers and that sort of thing as well. So vitamin C, even though it's famous, even though it's well known as a substance, it's not really the be all end all of antioxidants and free radical scavengers. It's one of the things in food that does that. And if you're eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, you're probably getting not only vitamin C, but lots of other more powerful antioxidants, and probably some things that we don't even really have names for yet. So then I mentioned before that vitamin A has a water-soluble form, beta carotene, which is a part of a whole class of substances called carotenoids. This also includes some other antioxidants, things that are mostly thought of as antioxidants, like lutein and zeaxanthin and astaxanthin, which is maybe more frequently employed as a food coloring than a nutrient. But these are all different yellowish to reddish substances in food. So whenever you see food that has yellowish or orangish color to it, is usually a sign that there are these carotenoids in the food. And that goes for, for example, salmon. I've seen farm raised salmon that wasn't given any carotenoids in its diet, and it had like white flesh, which is not what you ever see in wild salmon. So they feed them actually these carotenoids as a food supplement to make the meat orange or whatever, pinkish, reddish, whatever color it is. Which doesn't necessarily sound like, farmed salmon is kind of like, it's not the best food out there. But that orange color is still from the same class of substances. It's just that it's been absorbed by the animal, and now it's in their tissues. So cantaloupes, carrots, pumpkins, squashes, the yellow stuff in corn, sunflowers, the yellow coloring in sunflowers, they're all part of this family of substances, which the body can convert into vitamin A, and which have a similar, even before it's been converted by the liver into vitamin A, has the same kind of effect of being an antioxidant in the body. And once it is converted into vitamin A through your metabolism, it also has the other effects of protecting the body, protecting the immune system and things like that. So those are the carotenoids. They're found in carrots. They're found in lots of different foods. And pretty much any food that you would eat that would have that reddish or orangish or yellowish coloring to it is going to contain some kind of substance in this family. So yeah, and that is not something you can get too much of. You can get too much retinol. You can get too much vitamin A. You can't really get too much beta carotene. Beta carotene doesn't always get flushed from the system. Some people, if they eat a whole lot of beta carotene containing stuff or take a whole lot of beta carotene containing nutrients, it will accumulate in your tissue to some extent, just like it does in salmon. And it can make people have a little bit of an orangish or yellowish cast to their skin. But, you don't see a whole lot of that. Mostly that's in people who are on some kind of a unusual or slightly extreme diet, like drinking a lot of carrot juice, for instance, that where they're getting much more than the usual amount of these substances that you would get in most diets. I will be right back. So then there's the B vitamins. B vitamins are kind of weird. People call them B complex collectively. They have sometimes names like B3 or B6. They also have names like niacin and thiamine and riboflavin. And then there's folic acid, which nobody calls that, B7 or whatever it was. So people, what these things have, these things are very different substances, totally different substances from each other. What they have in common is that when they're not present, the body's metabolism gets thrown off because they form part of the enzymes that are involved in metabolic processes like cell replication and tissue growth and production of energy in the body. So people noticed, and these things were kind of derived empirically before they were before people knew what they actually were as far as substances. So people noticed, for instance, that people who tried to live on just bread alone or whatever would start to develop certain weird symptoms. If somebody's just, from an area where they're just eating corn, maybe they're going to get thicker skin, maybe they're going to get certain types of joint pain and things like that, that you could recognize as being visible symptoms of malnutrition. So people had names like pellagra for these diseases where people were starving. And eventually people came up with the name vitamin B to refer to whatever it was in the food that kept people from having these metabolic dysfunctions and irregularities of cell and tissue growth that happened among people whose nutrition was very restricted or limited to just eating grain or something like that. And so, these metabolic things usually either show up in children or they show up in people who have been on a suboptimal diet for a really long time. They don't show up as quickly as scurvy does, for instance, not usually. So people came up with the name vitamin B for whatever it was that was keeping this from happening. And eventually they figured out that it was a whole bunch of different substances because there's a whole bunch of complex enzymatic functions going on in the body that if they're not right, cells and tissues can't grow the right way and energy can't be produced the right way. So eventually these things got different names, got different designations. So you have things like niacin, which helps to keep the blood vessels open, helps with circulation. Thiamine and riboflavin, which help with tissue growth and also nerve function. Nerves don't function right in people that don't have enough B vitamins. So sometimes people take extra B vitamins in stressful situations. Sometimes vitamin makers market vitamins as being helpful in stressful situations. And the idea behind that is essentially that having extra B vitamins helps your nerves to function a little better. And a lot of people do say that when they take larger doses of B vitamins, that they feel more energetic, maybe that their memory is better. How much of a reproducible result that is a little bit up for questioning, but if it happens to work in some individuals, then it's a very low cost and low risk intervention to take extra B vitamins and see if it makes you feel better. And so a lot of people do. And one area that B vitamins play a really pronounced role in is embryonic and fetal development. Vitamin B12 and folic acid help to prevent birth defects in a noticeable and measurable way. And so there is a lot of rapid development of tissues and cells. And so folic acid and B12 help to protect that process. B12 is the one exception to what I said about most of these vitamins not being stored in the body in a usable way. If you take extra B12, the liver does store it, and it can remain stored in the liver for many years. So people develop B12 deficiencies sometimes when they're on a strictly vegetarian diet, because most of our regular sources of B12 are from animal food. Animals produce it. Animals, potentially including humans, can get B12 from their gut microbiome. All B12 is ultimately produced by microbes. So in some animals, it's produced in their guts and then by their microbiome and then stored in other tissues. In a lot of humans, the microbiome is not producing it, or the microbes that produce it are too far down in the intestine for it to be absorbed effectively. So in some people, they become deficient in it. But it takes many years usually to become deficient in B12. But folic acid is not like that. You can become deficient in folic acid pretty quickly. It's not stored in the body. It's just like the other B vitamins. It gets taken in and it gets flushed out. But it's not easy to become deficient in folic acid because basically all living things contain it. So if you're eating anything, you're likely to get some folic acid. But they still put it in prenatal vitamins because you can't really get too much of it, and getting not enough of it can result in a higher incidence of birth defects. So folic acid, sometimes called folate, sometimes it's in various different forms like methylfolate or something like that. They're all pretty similar substances. They're all basically forms of folic acid. And they'll all tend to have the same types of effects on helping cells and tissues to grow more effectively. And folic acid gets its name from foliage because it's found in leaves, but it's also found in other plant parts, and it's also found in animals that consume plants. So there's lots of it in the environment. It's a very common substance. So yeah, that's essentially the story of the B vitamins. The body uses them to produce enzymes that are involved in metabolism and tissue and cell development. All right, so let's see, did I cover A's, B's, C's? Yeah. That's basically it for the vitamins, the actual lettered vitamins. And then there's the minerals. So like I said, the minerals are things that come from the soil. They're geological. They're things that have been on the earth since the beginning of the world and will be there till the end of it, but they change forms. So for instance, iron, we know iron is a metal. When it oxidizes, it breaks down, crumbles. There can be detectable levels of iron in the soil. Those get absorbed by plants. And then when animals eat it, they use the iron for different things. What we most think of iron as being for in the human body and in other types of bodies like ours is carrying oxygen in the blood. So iron forms the center of the hemoglobin molecule, which is another thing that the body uses sunlight to help produce. But the hemoglobin molecule is very similar to the chlorophyll molecule in plants, other than the fact that at its core it has an iron molecule. So this iron bonds with oxygen and carries the oxygen around to the different cells where it gets exchanged onto other molecules and is involved in the process of releasing energy, respiration at a cellular level. So without enough iron, which is anemia, essentially, you get fatigue, weakness. Eventually, you get heart palpitations or like heart beating too fast because it's trying hard to move what iron there is around and get it reoxygenated and back out to the cells again, and that's hard on the heart. And of course, if it's bad enough, someone can die from an iron deficiency. Iron deficiency happens for a couple of different reasons. It's usually not that people aren't getting enough iron in their diet. It's usually that they're losing it by losing blood. They can also lose it just by having a chronic process of inflammation going on in their body where they're not making new blood cells fast enough and not having enough hemoglobin to carry iron around in their body, and that's called anemia of chronic disease, and that can happen with just about any long-term illness. But most of the time, when you see anemia, it's about loss of blood. Anemia is a pretty easy thing to measure as far as compared to other types of, like for example, compared to a B12 deficiency. It's a much easier thing to measure because you can look at the red blood cells under a microscope, and often you can tell by the fact that there are enough of them whether there's a problem or not. Sometimes you can look at the shape of them, and sometimes you can spin them down in a machine called a centrifuge and kind of look at them as a unit and see if there's too little of them. But anyway, iron is necessary for respiration, and people get it mostly from green leafy vegetables, dark greens. People also get it from red meat. Yeah, like I said, sunlight helps people to use it, but doesn't make iron. Nothing makes iron. All the iron that's in the world has been in the world basically the whole time, except meteorites. They occasionally chunks of iron fall from somewhere else, but for the most part, there's a fairly close to fixed amount of iron in the world. So plants absorb it from the soil or from the water in the soil. The water gets it from the soil, and if there's too much of it, it can kill plants, but some plants thrive on it more than others. So yeah, it's usually, iron deficiency is often easy for people to recognize. People who are familiar with anemia often can tell that they have it just from feeling how they're feeling. So, if somebody has heavy periods, for instance, that's probably the most frequent source of anemia. People also get it from GI bleeds in their gastrointestinal tract, sometimes from injuries, and sometimes from donating blood. And also sometimes from poisoning, because there are things like fava beans, which for some people will cause the red blood cells to break and spill all their iron, and then it goes to waste, and then you get what's called hemolytic anemia. Fava beans are one thing that causes that, but there are other sources too. A lot of radioactive substances will cause it. There are some illnesses that cause it too. So lots of different sources of it, but all of it tends to involve red blood cells either being lost or not being created or being destroyed. So that's iron. And as you know, iron's a metal. You might not really realize it, but a lot of the other minerals we talk about are metals too in their pure form, but they don't usually occur in nature in their pure form. So when you think of calcium, you probably think of bones and chalk and things like that, which is what calcium oxide looks like, a white powdery substance. Pure elemental calcium is silvery, but it turns white and powdery when it's exposed to air because it combines very readily with oxygen to make an oxide, a calcium compound. So food sources of calcium would include plants that are grown in a calcium-rich environment. People can get calcium from water. People can get calcium if water contains calcium. People can get calcium from animal products as well. Although, you know, most of the calcium in an animal is in the bones. So if you're cooking the bones, some of it comes out into the broth. But you know, we don't usually eat bones. There are calcium supplements out there that contain bone meal. Sometimes they call it hydroxyapatite, but it's basically just, you know, it's bone. Oyster shells, fossilized coral, which is essentially limestone. All of these things are, you know, ground up into powder and put into calcium supplements. The thing about taking calcium in supplement form is that calcium is an antacid. And so if you're taking calcium, you might not have enough acid in your stomach to absorb the calcium. It weakens the acid and keeps you from absorbing not only calcium, but anything else that's in your stomach with it. So it is harder to absorb calcium than it is a lot of other things. Calcium citrate is a common form of calcium that's in vitamins and supplements, and it is more absorbable than most other forms of calcium. For your body to use calcium, it needs to have a couple other cofactors. It needs to have magnesium and it needs to have vitamin D at a minimum. It also really helps if there is a substance in your body called calcitonin and also estrogen. And all of these things help the calcium to go into the bones, help the body to put the calcium into the form of bone cells and bone tissue. So besides being structural and providing the substance of bones, or a lot of the substance of bones, which bones also contain a lot of protein, calcium is also an electrolyte in the body. It helps to conduct electricity in certain nerve cells. So it's an electrolyte and it helps the nerves to work by conducting electricity in certain channels, in certain parts, certain cells in the nervous system. And so it's used, the body uses it in the process of contracting muscles, and that includes the heart muscle. So calcium has a lot to do with smooth and effective contraction of muscles and nerve function. And so that's, calcium can be stored in the bones and released from the bones so that it can be used by the body and the nervous system. But if not enough gets put in, the bones get weaker and weaker over time until you get osteoporosis and are more susceptible to the bones breaking if they're jarred, if the person falls or gets bumped into or something like that. And changes in bone density can, well, one of the main ways that people lose independence as older adults is by breaking a bone and not being able to take care of themselves because they can't stand up anymore because they broke their hip, something like that. Or, you know, they broke one of their arms and it's not healing. So it's, you know, they need things done for them. So that's one of the main ways that people lose independence, which in turn has a variety of negative health outcomes associated with it. So, keeping the bones healthy is one of the main ways for people to be able to stay strong and healthy and be able to do things on their own. So dietarily, again, green vegetables are really good. They contain a lot of these micronutrients and minerals, and calcium is definitely an example of that. There's a wild plant that grows around here called chickweed. No, not chickweed. Goosefoot or lamb's quarters, which contains tons of calcium. It's a really good source of calcium, and that's something that is good to have it as part of your diet if you're trying to eat wild food. It's been cultivated here since prehistoric times, and still is today. So it's a good plant to know about. Probably contains a higher amount of calcium than just about any other vegetable. Potassium and magnesium and sodium all exist in the form of salts. They all are light metals that in pure form would be like a soft, squishy, silvery substance, but they're very reactive. They don't stay in a pure form. They interact with air and water to basically oxidize into a white powdery substance, or a white crystalline substance. And so these are in the soil in varying amounts, and become part of the tissue of the plants that grow in the soil. Sodium, of course, also is found in salt from the sea or from salt deposits on land, which ultimately are from when there was water there and it dried up. But salt is something that we often get from a non-biotic source and directly, we're not usually out there consuming other minerals in mineral form, but with salt we do, and so do other animals. And it's a very abundant mineral in our environment because so much of the world is covered in salty water. So that's a substance that you can get directly in rock form and eat it. Which, like I said, you can do that with calcium, but in the normal course of things, people really don't. But in supplements, sometimes they do. But salt is probably the one mineral that people tend to get too much of. You need it. It does the same thing as these other ones. They are all electrolytes. They all help with conduction of nerves in different circuits of the nervous system, so to speak. Sodium and potassium have a tendency to balance each other out, and different hormones will, for instance, cause the body to spill potassium and retain sodium, or spill sodium and retain potassium through the kidneys. And so these electrolytes affect the presence of those hormones, and then because the hormones are produced in order to keep them in balance, and then the presence of those hormones affects all sorts of other things throughout the body. So the kidneys and the sodium potassium balance have a big effect on the nervous system and the endocrine system. So they're very important substances, and they have fairly immediate effects, right? If you drink if you eat a bunch of something really salty, it'll make you thirsty. So your body is immediately requesting water, which it will use to flush out some of that sodium to keep things in balance. So they're very, very dynamic in terms of how they're moved around in the body, and they're very important, but you have to kind of consume them continuously. Whereas iron, the iron that you eat stays in your body for months. The calcium that you eat stays in your body maybe for decades because it gets stored in your bones. So there is much faster cycling through sodium and potassium and magnesium than there is through calcium. Magnesium sometimes gets deposited in the bones too, so there's it's not always the case, but these are electrolytes. They're all electrolytes. They all have different functions within the nervous system as electrolytes. And by an electrolyte, I mean something that makes water into a conductive substance. Water by itself doesn't conduct electricity very well. Water with salts in it does conduct electricity very well. Water with different types of salts in it is used in different places in the body to conduct essentially different messages in different circuits of the nervous system. I hope that's not too complicated, but basically they all help change the way that your body conducts electricity and runs the functions that use it. So that is, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium. Iodine is another substance that is a mineral. It is a pure substance that occurs in nature in various different forms. There is some iodine in a lot of different plants. It's coming from the environment. Things that come from the sea tend to have more iodine, so sea vegetables tend to have a lot of it. You can actually eat a serving of certain seaweeds and get enough iodine to last you for a year. You only need tiny, tiny amounts of iodine. It's something that is only used in trace amounts in your body. And so it's stored in the thyroid and kind of used by the thyroid to produce T3 and T4, which are thyroid hormones. And those control the rate of metabolism and body temperature and other things to do with how the body is handling caloric energy, how the body is handling food energy, and turning that energy into heat and movement in the body. Copper is another thing that you just need a tiny amount of in your diet. Copper and iron sort of balance each other out. Too much copper will affect how your body is handling iron, but it is something that you do need to get a little bit of in your diet, and that is something geological, something that's coming from the rocks and soil in the environment, rather than being a more elaborate substance that's produced within living things, the way that the vitamins are. So in addition to the vitamins and minerals, there is a whole entire other world out there of micronutrients that are not necessarily specifically and individually necessary for life, but that are helpful to it. For instance, proanthocyanidins, which are the purple color in berries and some fruits, grapes, things like that. You won't die if you don't get any of them necessarily. I mean, you won't die from that. But if you do have them in your diet, they are helpful. They're antioxidants. They help to keep DNA from making bad copies of itself. They help keep cells from being destroyed by outside stresses. So they and they also reduce inflammation. So these things are things that your body kind of runs on the expectation that you're going to be eating a variety of different substances. And if you were to go out into nature and eat a variety of different substances that are not poisonous to you, you would probably end up eating quite a bit of dark purple soft fruits and vegetables, dark purple and red, which would contain these types of substances. So, blackberries, raspberries, red grapes, and so forth. There's a lot of sometimes there's been a lot of marketing by the wine industry to say that wine contains these different polyphenols, these different antioxidants, which it does, but so does the grape juice that the wine's made out of, and so do lots of other fruits and vegetables. So you're hearing about it from them because they're marketing a product and they have the money to put into doing the research to quantify how much is in what and so forth. But it's not exclusive to that set of products. It is something that is common in certain types of food. And there are also some oil-based antioxidants that are found in different oils, like sesame oil, like sunflower seed oil. These all contain a variety of different substances, many of which probably have not really been studied with any kind of depth, that are there to help preserve the seeds, to help keep the seeds from going bad, but that have the same effect in your body of helping to preserve your body and helping to keep the cells in your own body from being destroyed by the same sorts of fungi and bacteria and toxic substances and so forth that might have negative effects on the seeds, so that the oils come from. So, don't think of the few named vitamins as being the only important substances in food. I think in the mid 20th century, there was sort of a fascination with the idea that you could reduce it all down to a few substances, kind of alchemize it, or maybe, make a little tiny capsule that you could take into space with you that would give all your nutrients for the day. But that's not really, how people are mostly intended to eat. And if you're not going into space and you don't need to have everything in a little tiny capsule, it's very nice to be able to eat a diet of beautiful, nutritious, good tasting foods and have that be your main source of all these different forms of nurturants that that your body is designed to have. All right, any questions about all that? It's a question about how black cohosh oil is applied or used. So black cohosh oil can be taken internally, just like black cohosh tincture. It can also be applied topically to injuries as an anti-inflammatory. Let's see. And in herbs like cut and sifted rose hips, does the processing and drying of the plant destroy the vitamin C, ascorbic acid? No, I would say that it does not. But vitamin C is a pretty hardy substance. And once you're familiar with the taste of it, you can actually taste it just like you can with citric acid. But no, it doesn't go away very easily. Heating can destroy it, but just like cutting, sifting, drying usually is not going to destroy it. Heating or prolonged exposure to sunlight might destroy it or might break it down into other substances. But it's not volatile. It doesn't evaporate, and so it's more like citric acid or tannic acid and other organic non-aromatic organic acids, that they tend to persist in the plant matter that they're in for a very long time. What's the difference between citric acid and ascorbic acid? They're just kind of two different substances, but they both occur together a lot of the time. Like citruses have both in them, but the citric acid that makes them especially sour is not the same stuff that makes them prevent scurvy. So it's two different carbon-based acids with different molecular structures that just often occur together, and both of them are involved in the production of energy in the body. Both of them are part of the body's metabolism. They're not both vitamin C. No, ascorbic acid is vitamin C. Citric acid is an antioxidant that isn't vitamin C. and doesn't have like a vitamin name, but it does have some of the same effects as vitamin C in terms of being part of the Krebs cycle, or part of the process of production of energy on a molecular level, and also being an antioxidant in terms of keeping oxidation and oxygen free radical damage from happening in the body. But they are two different things.
Oh, okay.
So next time we are going to be talking about, starting with the next time, we're going to be talking about some of the plant families that a lot of medicinal herbs belong to, and how to recognize those families and what sorts of substances are produced in those families of plants. So kind of seeing some of the kinship between different medicinal herbs and how they grow and how to recognize them and that sort of thing. Which, in a way, kind of returning to some of what we were talking about at the very beginning of the course with getting to know the plants. Kind of gearing up towards spring coming again, and there being more of a variety of plants for people to go outside and recognize. Would vitamin E also help in preserving lotions and creams? Absolutely. Vitamin E is a really common ingredient to use in oil-based stuff as a preservative. And so, wheat germ oil contains a lot of vitamin E on its own and tends to keep well because of that. You can also get vitamin E in by itself to add to things in a liquid form, to add to salves and lotions and things to keep them from going bad. Although a lot of them will keep pretty well on their own if you make them right and don't allow there to be any excess moisture in them. I'm not sure as far as the question about fava beans and if that's why.
I just thought of it because he mentions it.
Yeah, he does
with a
mention
nice
that.
Chianti.
Yeah, no, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. But yeah, some people, fava beans don't do that. Most people, they don't do that. But in some people, they do. And in some people, fresh beans will do that. Like raw, fresh beans will do that. But not in most people. All right. So yeah, starting next time, we'll be talking about some of the large plant families that contain a lot of different medicinal herbs, and getting to be more familiar with those. And yeah, I hope to pretty soon have some more information about exactly the dates and everything for the weekend intensive and what workshops are going to be included in that. So I have some goings on right now that I'm trying to get sorted out, but hope to have some final decisions and final information about that for you in the very near future.
Yay!
All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and
Thank you.
I will talk to you again soon.
Thank you
night.
so much.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Have a good evening.
Thank
You too.
you.